Ben 10 has a ton of episodes. Within the Prime continuity, there is about 230 episodes, and while there are so many phenomenal episodes that truly feel groundbreaking to watch, whether it's your first time or maybe your 50th time, there is also some episodes that are considered to be black sheep or like bad eggs in the group, and while some of them I could definitely agree on and are episodes I don't enjoy, I can still watch them, doesn't mean I'm going to like it that much. There is also those episodes that are considered unpopular or disliked that I actually really enjoy, and this is a little random, but I kind of want to take some time to appreciate those episodes between all 4 series. So one thing to keep in mind before we begin is that this is an obvious thing, but it's subjective on some of these episodes if they're really truly considered super hated or unpopular or something like that. While there are episodes that are obviously borderline fact that they're favored or super popular or well known, even if you're not a Ben 10 fan really, you're just like a casual fan or you just watched it a couple times and you just know about it because of how it's been talked about on the internet. Some episodes that are widely hated are on here definitely, but there's also episodes that I feel like are like maybe just okay to people and maybe just mid, but the thing is I felt like they were unpopular enough to talk about, or I just felt like appreciating them anyway. And between each series I am going to mention any honorable mentions if there are any, so that's something I did want to clarify before we begin. We are going to go from series order, so we're going to start with Classic, then Alien Force, then Ultimate Alien, and then Omniverse. There's no reboot episodes in this video because I haven't seen the reboot yet. I plan to watch it for the first time eventually for that super secret project I keep alluding to, which it's pretty obvious what it is, but I'm still going to allude to it just a little bit longer, so consider it also like sort of a prequel to that. In fact, I guess a sneak peek since I will be talking about my thoughts on a whole bunch of episodes. I also do want to mention that I'm not going to be super thorough in terms of talking about the episodes themselves. That is going to be for a later time, but for now I'm just going to sort of talk about the it's like bullet pointing basically. I'm going to bullet point why I like these episodes, and I will talk about genuine criticisms I have for the episodes if there are some, and trust me, when we get to Alien Force onward, there will be some. With that said, let's begin with the Classic series where we have 2 episodes to talk about. The Classic series is a special case because this series, while not my personal favorite, is the one series where I feel like there isn't necessarily a super hated episode, with the exception of maybe one that's considered very underwhelming or bland, but we'll get to that. So it was a little hard to actually pick what episodes I want to say, because I could think of a handful that I think are very underwhelming, and I decided to talk about 2 of them here in a little bit more detail, but then there's going to be one honorable mention, so that's something I just want to point out. So these first 2 episodes I'm going to talk about don't necessarily have the most to defend because they're either super solid but just not very popular, or it's just a little hard to defend because of how underwhelming it might be, especially when you compare it to the rest of the Classic series. The first episode we have to talk about is the Season 2 episode, Gwen 10. Gwen 10 is not an unpopular episode per se, but the thing is, I noticed there was a weird amount of hate or disdain for this episode, and I feel like what it was, and this was maybe an experience for just me, but when I was a kid, I didn't really care for the episode because, I did love Gwen, I loved all the characters, but, seeing Ben in a situation where he knows how things are supposed to be, but no one else either believe him or pretend to not believe him, it's like one of those second-hand embarrassment things, and it's just it's so unusual and not what the show's status quo is, to the point where it feels alienating. Another reason why I feel like this episode could have been alienating is just also because since Ben doesn't have the Omnitrix, even though he's supposed to have it, maybe a young kid would be feel bad for him. Ben could be entitled, but it's 2 seasons in where we like the protagonist, we enjoy him, we want to see him succeed, and seeing him fail at something he already succeeded at already is, I guess it was disheartening. I don't know. I'm kind of talking on my ass a little bit, but that's just the only theory I could think of. I don't know why this episode had a bit of disdain. At least I've noticed some people will be like, I didn't really like this episode, but then I rewatched it, and then I liked it. So, it's I guess it's just one of those, you can't really answer it. It's a different experience or different thought process for everyone. Upon rewatching it, I was like, holy shit, this episode's really fun, And it's also technically our first introduction to the Omniverse we would get eventually in Omniverse. So that's something that I appreciate the episode for. Seeing Gwen's designs for some of the aliens were cool. Seeing comparisons to scenes from the pilot and from Secrets was really awesome. Having Max, show off him obviously knowing who Vilgax and the Omnitrix are, and it's not even foreshadowing, it's just he's actually reacting out there. It's a lot of fun.
Don't you remember? You took Vilgax out with some super high-tech weapon thing.
Weapon?
Another thing I really like is also seeing Ben treat the Omnitrix in a similar way that Gwen would normally treat it, because now that he doesn't wear it, he actually knows the seriousness of like how important the device is, while Gwen is the one being a little more immature with the device.
The Omnitrix is a complicated piece of alien technology. It's not about having fun.
And I just feel like it's just such a good episode. We get to see Max use the Omnitrix, and it's cool. It's a timeline where the events of the first episode didn't take place how they originally did, and it's fun. As for the other classic episode, that would be the season 4 episode, Ben for Good Buddy. This episode is definitely unpopular. Like, I think this is the only classic episode that actually gets genuine flack. Whenever I see anyone ask if, like, there's anything wrong with the classic series, at least from an episode standpoint, people usually bring up this one. And even though I am going to defend it, I can actually really see why. Upon rewatching it for this video, because, you know, I've watched it multiple times within the past, like, a few months, because I've just been rewatching Ben 10 like crazy for the project again. I keep talking about it. I will introduce it eventually. Don't worry. But the thing is that this episode, when I really think about it from an analytical standpoint, it's so underwhelming. I'm not doing a good job at defending this episode at all. But basically, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna sort of like I've been going unscripted entirely. If you couldn't tell, these videos specifically, these type of videos are unscripted. But I'm gonna go unscripted and just like mock speed section my way to talking about the reasons why I still find this episode enjoyable despite its very bland premise. Okay, so to start off, I really do like the concept of this episode, at least if it was written a little better. So I guess this one I'm not necessarily defending entirely, but more so trying to give justification for a rewrite. It's about 3 people who basically steal the rust bucket so they can destroy the grand opening of a highway so they can continue to do their crimes. And it's like, they're just regular people. They're the exact same as the opening people from Permanent Retirement, which is like, they're exactly the same. The only difference is that the road crew, as what they're known as, has a more distinct, like, designs and voices. I think I would have redone this concept a little bit, maybe have it where they're really techie geniuses, like they're tech savvy, and, you know, have a reason to be threatening. Otherwise, it's just like, why are they a threat? And even if you justify it by saying, oh, well, you know, the trio don't really treat them as a threat at first, and then it's like, oh shit, I guess we should have, and then they go after them and then they beat them. That's one thing, I guess, but I don't know, it's still not that great, but it's still not awful either. The main issue with this episode, I guess, besides the road crew themselves, is the rust bucket, because this episode treats it as if it always fucks up. And to be fair, you know, in the Omniverse flashbacks, we do see the rust bucket 2 instead of the first rust bucket because it broke down, I'm pretty sure. So you could justify it as maybe it's starting to break down because, you know, it's old, but it's like, I doubt the writers planned for that. It's just, you know, me trying to fill in, like, any sort of inconsistencies or issues I have with the episode. And it's like, oh, you know, you can't flush the toilet, you can't open the freezer, and it's like, this has never been an issue before. And, you know, as a kid viewer, you know, if you're like 5, 6, 7, you're not going to notice that. But once you get older, you know, and you start watching it and you're thinking about these things in the back of your head, it is a big, I won't say a big flaw, but it's definitely a flaw for the episode. For scenes I like, at least for Ben specifically, it's nice to see Ripjaws and Upchuck get some appreciation, especially since Ripjaws was forgotten entirely in Season 3, and this is Upchuck's second appearance, so it was nice that he was an additional alien that got to be used more than once in Classic. I like seeing Upgrade at the end too, because him merging the train is legitimately a decent scene. There's some pretty funny stuff too, like intentional or not. Like, we have this one reaction that the trio gives to this old lady's teeth, and it's probably one of my favorite reaction images in the entire franchise. Like, Max and Gwen's face get me every time. Also, not to mention, shout out to these hilariously outdated lines.
Wi-Fi, email, internet, and radio.
It plays in HD, and he's got every game ever made.
Every game ever made? Wait a minute, when was this episode released? 2007? Oh shit, does this imply that Ben could be playing Sonic with Sticks at any point? Imagine just seeing him playing and he's like getting really pissed off because he's just glitching through the silver boss fight or something. I also really enjoyed the music in this episode. This episode, along with other Season 4 episodes, used music that sound like the Race Against Time music. Although it was probably the same music, though I'm not 100% sure on that.
You gotta be kidding me.
Another scene I like, as corn plate tweet energy as this is there's this scene where, like, Ben and Gwen basically put ice cream in Max's mouth at the end after it melts, and it's like they high five, and it's just sweet. I do like to see the, you know, the cousins actually get along in the classic series. I just think it's best to classify this episode as junk food. Like, it's not that good, but I think there's still some enjoyment to get out of it. It's minor stuff, but I think enough to where I don't think this episode deserves to be called outright awful or bad. Just okay, or even mid, because mid doesn't mean bad, it just means mediocre. Now, was that a good defense? Probably not, but, you know, I didn't say I was going to defend them well, just that I was going to defend them. Like I said, for the classic series, it's a bit of a special case because across the boards, for the most part, all the episodes are beloved or just considered really, I won't say, not all of them are popular, but like, you know, they're favored or memorable, and Ben for Good Buddy's biggest weakness is that it's not that memorable. If you're like a fan of certain things, particularly the aliens used in this episode, like Rituals or Upchuck, then maybe it's a little more memorable. However, I would say that's very shallow reasoning to try to justify an episode to be not that bad. So I did try to mention other scenes or moments or things I liked about the episode. So as I mentioned before, there is going to be honorable mentions between each series, and for the classic series, I only could think of one, and I'm not sure if this one is really considered unpopular, but at least for me, this was like an episode I really didn't like too much. And I still would consider probably my second least favorite episode of all classic, and that is Monster Weather from Season 3. My main reason for disliking this episode is for the way Ben's written. He is extra entitled, even more than usual, so it is kind of unfun to watch. But what makes this episode actually not as bad as I remember is the action scenes. Heat Blast and Forms especially. I love seeing Heat Blast go supernova and the little fire sword thing he forms to cut the water. And Forms does some pretty cool shit too, including the seismic clap and playing on the guitar. And Ben himself even gets in on the action too. Like, the animation and action scenes are legitimately really good. Honestly, I can't even lie, even though this is my second least favorite episode of Classic, this is still one of my favorite action scenes ever. Like, even when it's one of my least favorite episodes of the series, I still fuck with it. Now we move on to Alien Force. The first two seasons of Alien Force, at least in my opinion, are honestly the peak of the franchise. I love the writing, I love the chemistry between the heroes, I love the aliens, I love the action scenes, I love the overarching story with the hybrid invasion and everything, but unfortunately the third season is definitely a bit of a mixed bag. While some people are a little bit more harsh to Season 3, I actually like a lot of the stories told in this season, even if some of them are still pretty ridiculous. With that said, there were two episodes in particular I did want to defend, starting off with the Season 3 episode, Simple. When I first saw this episode as a kid, I didn't think much of it. Like, I enjoyed it, but I didn't think it was necessarily bad or anything. I just ate anything Ben 10 up. But then when I found out that this episode was actually hated in the fandom, and I saw the reasons why, honestly I see where they're coming from, because this episode is pretty mishandled. I do like a lot of things about it that I do want to defend, however. To get it out of the way now, yes, one of the main reasons I do have a soft spot is because of Lodestar's debut. He's one of my favorite aliens. Of course I'm going to have a soft spot for Lodestar. But there's more to it than just that little moment. The main plot of this episode is that a little girl named Probity messages Ben and asks him to stop a war that's going on our planet. Despite how obvious it is that it's easier said than done, Ben decides to try anyway. To properly defend this episode, I actually want to start with the things I dislike first, and then I'll mention reasons why I like it, because they kinda bounce off each other. I think the main issue with this episode is definitely the people Ben is trying to help. The two generals in this episode are very irrational and selfish, almost to a point where it's incredibly infuriating. There is one little conversation that does sort of justify it, maybe with quotes, because they do give a reason to why they're being irrational.
If they can't afford houses or food or schools, it's the war's fault. If there were no war, they'd blame us for all that.
But I'll admit, it doesn't make it any less annoying. This is not specific to the episode, but this is the worst use of shaky cam I've ever fucking seen.
Hey!
I also used to not like the ending of this episode because I always thought it was handled very poorly, but then I realized, and maybe I'm kind of, again, cornplay tweeting here, but I kind of actually like how this episode ends. So the reason why I'm defending this episode is because of Ben specifically. I mean, he's the main focus, it's his problem he's got to deal with that he's decided to take on. So what I'm getting at is, think about Ben in Season 1 and 2 of Alien Force. He's very mature, he's composed, he's learning, he struggles a little bit, but, you know, he knows right from wrong. In Season 3, he starts to get a bit of an ego boost, and you can see that as soon as the first episode of Season 3.
Really mad at you.
But you won't stay mad at me. I'm adorable.
You're completely full of yourself.
Which is forgivable because I'm so adorable.
What I like is that this episode actually uses Ben's ego against him. He tries to handle a situation that he's clearly not able to, and it starts to bite him in the ass. He has to deal with irrational people, he has to deal with ridiculous situations, and he gets pissed off enough to a point where he tries to force a truce, and just nothing works. Ben's heart is in the right place in this episode, and he tried to help, but there's only so much he could do. That, in the very least, Probity, the little girl in the episode, does get to be rich by the end, so that's nice. This type of episode seems like it would fall on its ass, and I guess it does fall on its ass considering, again, it's a hated episode in the fandom, but the fact that even after noticing its flaws, I still happen to really like it is something I'm actually kind of happy about. Dare I say this might be one of my favorite Season 3 episodes. There is some commentary on war and stuff, and whether or not you like how the commentary is handled is all up to you, but in terms of the writing of other stuff, such as the characters, I think Ben was written perfectly fine, and I actually really like how Kevin was written, at least when it came to his jokes. He does give a laugh or two.
Life is full of disappointments. What is she, 5? Past time she learned.
You do have a heart.
Yeah, that's what poor people have instead of money.
Unfortunately, Gwen didn't get to do much in this episode, which is kind of a shame. I feel like with someone as mature as her, I feel like she'd actually be really good in a plot like this. I also like that even though Ben does have a bit of an ego, his main focus is trying to help because Probity wants him to, and because he does legitimately care about her and how she's doing.
We have to keep our strength up. For the war, you know.
I'll bet she doesn't eat like this every day.
What I'm trying to say mostly is that if you try to look at this episode as more of a ego test for Ben, or just a sort of like trying to handle too much on his plate sort of situation, then I don't think this episode is nearly as bad as people make it out to be. Even with Ben's ego in mind, I can't lie, it just got a laugh out of me.
That's right, Ben 10. And I've come all this way to tell you that war just isn't cool.
Maybe I'm cornplate tweeting again, but I just feel like Ben in this episode, he's really paying attention to how this is affecting the people of this planet, and he genuinely wants to help, and he's not thinking about, oh man, I'm so famous, I'm so cool, I'm totally gonna be able to do this. A part of that is definitely that because, you know, he thinks he can handle it, but again, he wants to be a hero just for the sake of being a hero. I like that. Some other minor stuff I do like is the aesthetics of this episode. I actually really like how the planet looks. Of course, we're not going to see an intricate city or anything, considering the fact that they're in the middle of a war, so it's going to be like an open battlefield. But the fact that we get these like cool floating ships, and at nighttime with these 3 different moons, it's interesting, it's unique, I like it. As for our second episode of Alien Force Season 3, we have the episode Fool's Gold. So I do want to give this episode a little bit slack from the get-go, considering the fact that the original plot of this episode was actually altered because of the network, so they wanted to write this episode in a way to just get back at them. The plot for this episode is that aliens come every 17 years to Earth on spring break to basically celebrate, eat a bunch of popcorn, and shit a bunch of gold. There is a secondary plot that I do kind of like, but it's not really focused on that much. Basically, it's about Kevin being very self-conscious after his mutation in the beginning of Season 3. Kevin avoids Gwen every chance he gets, and by the end of the episode, he finally opens up to her a little bit, which is a sweet little moment. I kinda wish they focused a little bit more on this, and maybe this was a holdover from the original plot that they wanted to do for this episode, but either way, it's still neat to have, just, again, wish it had more focus. Unlike Simple, where I took time to actually really look at the plot and the characters and the writing and try to give some analytical standpoints on why I enjoy the episode, in this case, this is one of those, I just like it because it's fun sort of deals. When you get past the idea that this episode basically centers around gold shit, it's actually not too bad. I like some of the moments, such as seeing the little aliens actually on spring break. It's a little funny, not super funny, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. I like the scene where the trio shows some efficient teamwork when they're fighting off the mayor. In fact, during the entire episode, they actually act a little more professional, which is actually refreshing to see. And I'm not gonna lie, the Ecco Ecco Vor moment is pretty fucking funny. I can't mention Orban Deca's species without mentioning the fact that there are nods to gremlins in there, especially with the whole rules about eating different foods and stuff. When you just look at it as something super silly and whimsical and just having a bunch of stupid fun, intentional or not, it's not too bad. Also, similar to Simple, I actually do like the aesthetics of this episode. I like the farm, rural area that we get in this episode as opposed to the usual city or desert, so that's pretty cool. And we get to see the characters in the daylight colors, so that's a plus, especially for Alien Force. As far as an honorable mention goes for Alien Force, I can't really think of any on the top of my head that I would defend, because bad episodes such as Primus or something are episodes I actually still really dislike. Again, I can watch them, I just don't enjoy them that much. But there is one episode that I feel like isn't really appreciated that much that I do want to give a little bit of recognition, and that is Time Heals. Before I actually watch this episode again for the first time in years with my sisters, as I am getting them to watch all of Ben 10, I thought Time Heals was just okay. I don't remember caring for it that much, but then upon rewatching it, I was like, holy shit, this episode rocks. I just love the idea of Gwen trying to use a time travel spell to undo Kevin's mutation and then fucking up an entire timeline, and just seeing Gwen in this solo story is just really fun. I love that Paradox is in it, I love that Gwen talks to different timeline versions of her, I love that Charmcaster and Hex get to be the center of attention here. As a bonus, we get to see UAF Gwen wear the Lucky Girl costume, which was really awesome. I also love the subtle details in this episode, like the scene where Gwen's eyes tears up when she doesn't know truly if she's able to fix everything after seeing Ben and Kevin in an apocalypse. Like, I just love this episode. The only reason I didn't want to go more thorough into it is just because I feel like this episode isn't as hated as the other episodes I already talked about. Now we move on to Ultimate Alien, which like Alien Force had a bit of a mixed bag for its third season. When I was a kid and I watched the third season, I noticed a lot of episodes had me feeling not so much that the episodes sucked, but more so asking, where's the rest of it, as I felt like a lot of episodes were undercooked. Really cool concepts, but undercooked. And out of all those episodes, I think the one that I favor the most is Girl Trouble. Whenever someone asks me what my guilty pleasure episodes are, I feel like for Ultimate Alien, this one always comes to mind because despite the fact that this episode is kind of underwhelming in certain ways, I really like this episode and its premise. This episode introduces Ben and Gwen's cousin, Sunny, from Anodyne. Sunny is basically a bratty version of Gwen in every way. She looks and sounds like her, has Anodyne powers but is stronger, yet she's absolutely childish and selfish, hence why she's here. Before I talk about my thoughts on Sunny as a character and the episode as a whole, I do want to mention that I am aware that Sunny is a reference to a character from Bewitched, which is this sitcom about, I don't know, fucking witches. I didn't watch it. Gwen and Sunny having the same designs and voice actresses is a reference to how Serena is played by the same actress who played the main character Samantha in Bewitched. Of course, as a kid, I didn't get that, and most people probably didn't get that, but now that I know that, it's a little entertaining. Honestly, as a kid, it didn't even register to me that Sunny is supposed to be, like, a copy of Gwen. Like, I didn't even think, like, oh wow, she looks and sounds like her. I don't know, it just didn't register with me.
And I thought about not coming here and running away with Antonio, that's my boyfriend, and going someplace fun. I saw a TV show about Hawaii, and it looked fun. Have you guys ever been? We're trying to work here, Sunny. That's probably why it's so boring.
Honestly, props to Ashley Johnson, the voice actress for Gwen and Sunny, because even though she's doing the same voice, she does a different performance with both of them, to the point where I couldn't even tell it was them. And even when hearing them back to back and knowing that it's the same person, I don't feel like I'm hearing the same person. One thing I like about Sunny is the fact that she's kind of like an albedo for Gwen, how albedo is to Ben. Although I do wish there was more to her. Sadly, this is her only appearance in the franchise, well, proper appearance I should say. Unfortunately, she doesn't get to do too much on her debut episode, but it's still entertaining. I do like how the trio has two issues to deal with, as not only are they dealing with the surprise visit of Sunny, but beforehand and during the entire episode they're dealing with the issues of the robots from Dimension 12, so that's kinda neat. I feel like they try to plant certain seeds there, like how Sunny's very envious of Gwen being considered a super successful, smart, and pretty cousin, while Sunny's considered like, you know, the damaged bad child. But unfortunately, it's only really talked about very briefly at the end of the episode. Similar to Fool's Gold, this is one of those episodes I feel like that is super silly, but it's fun with its silliness, like Antonio as a character as a whole. I don't really give a shit about him, but he does give me a little bit of a chuckle here and there.
Sunny, come back in the house. Is that tree from the backyard?
No.
It was also nice to see Verdona again, since we haven't seen her since her debut in Season 1 of Alien Force. Although unfortunately this is her last chronological appearance, so not much to really say on that. I honestly think Sunny's a pretty neat character that I feel like had potential to be a recurring villain or anti-hero or something. Having an opposite of Gwen, like how Ben has an opposite of himself, could have been a really cool team-up as well. As far as she goes in this episode as our central antagonist, she's entertaining enough. There are little moments I also do enjoy, such as Kevin's reaction to having to deal with all this bullshit. I think some of the other jokes land. I don't know, I just like the vibe this episode brings, where it's just a silly, quirky little family issue with Gwen and Sunny, so that's all I really have to say on it. As for Ultimate Alien, two episodes I think that do deserve a bit more recognition are Victor Despoils and The Perfect Girlfriend. Victor Despoils' plot is a little similar to Simple, but it is handled a little better. Simple is even directly referenced at the beginning of the episode.
No problem. Ben can take care of that over the weekend.
I learned my lesson last time.
I think this episode's strongest suit is that Ben, Gwen, and Kevin all think of logical reasons on how to deal with certain things given that the fictional country of Zarkovia is dealing with a civil war. I like a lot of the aesthetics, I like a lot of the dialogue, and of course how could I not mention the iconic return of Heat Blast. Also super random, but shout out to Fritz. She's like really cute. I hope she's living her best life, for real. As for The Perfect Girlfriend, I think this episode is definitely one of the most undercooked that Ultimate Alien has to offer. I love the idea of Elena as a character and as a villain, and unfortunately this is her last appearance in the franchise. Again, proper I should say. Essentially, Elena finds a way to disguise herself as Julie and pretend to be her, and ends up being the ideal perfect girlfriend. I think the main thing I love about this episode is obviously the concept. It's such a good idea, but it just doesn't do much with it, or if it does anything with it, there's just not enough time focused on Elena. I feel like maybe to set up something else for her to come back again as a villain would be fine, but by the time Omniverse rolls around, she's cured of the nanochip shit and she's perfectly a good guy again. Now, that's not to say there aren't things to really like about this episode. For example, Gwen and Kevin. They have a very healthy relationship and communicate really well in this episode. And while Ben does at first take advantage of Elena's kindness, you know, thinking that she's Julie, he does actually legitimately want to do things that she wants to do by the end of the episode, so that's something nice to see, you know, Ben actually being a decent boyfriend. One thing I didn't notice as a kid, but definitely is a weakness to the episode, is that the ending of this episode is almost one for one how Revenge of the Swarm ended, which is an episode I did consider putting on this list, but I do like The Perfect Girlfriend a little more. While it's not one of my favorite Ultimate Alien episodes, it definitely had the potential to be. And now we're up to the last of the 4 series, Omniverse. The main division with Omniverse in the fandom comes mainly from its art style. I personally really grew to love the art style when the show first came out because it's the same art director as Transformers Animated Derek J. Wyatt. That and a lot of the stories are very solid and really well written. While there are some iconic and banger episodes, there's also a few bad eggs in this series as well. I don't think the bad episodes in Omniverse are nearly as annoying to sit through as, say, the UAF ones, for example. If I'm being real, similar to the classic series, I don't think Omniverse episodes that I want to defend are necessarily super hated because a lot of the worst parts of Omniverse are parts I genuinely dislike and don't really feel like defending. Because of that, the last two episodes of Omniverse I'm going to talk about aren't really in that big of need of an intricate description. The first episode we're going to talk about isn't necessarily hated, but it's definitely underappreciated. This is one of those episodes you could easily skip, but I feel like it's so entertaining that I honestly think you should watch it, even if it's a very filler episode. The first episode we're going to talk about is The Vengers. Upon my first watch, I don't really remember what exactly I thought of the episode. I remember key moments I liked, but I didn't really remember how much I enjoyed the episode. But upon rewatching it, I absolutely adore this episode, and it might be one of my favorite sleeper hits of Omniverse. This episode sees the return of a few familiar faces: Billy Billions, Captain Nemesis, Kangaroo Commando, and of course the iconic Mizuma. The four become the Vengers, a superhero team, or at least that's what they claim to be, in order to usurp Ben as the famous hero. I think the main reason I enjoy this episode, honestly, is just the funny factor this episode has. There's a lot of jokes that honestly land for me. I think out of all the jokes, my favorite is the one where Ben and Rook just watch paint dry. That is so fucking funny to me. Like, Ben is so extra, and for what? As far as action sequences go, how can I not mention the iconic brainstorm scene? It's a huge shame this is his only fight scene in all of Omniverse because it's easily one of my favorites in the whole series. I also love that Brainstorm technically saves the day as he's able to calculate that the Vengers won't last long with Ben out of the picture, hence why Ben decides not to do much. Also, this little dance 11-year-old Ben does is one of my favorite young Ben moments. I don't know why, I just think it's really fun. I think your enjoyment of this episode definitely depends on if you like the Vengers themselves or find them amusing, and I personally do, at least in this episode specifically. I just think this episode's a really fun time. As for the other episode, that would be Catfight. Now this episode I actually really liked even when I first watched it, but I can see why people dislike it. The harem episodes, or however you want to categorize it, aren't very good. In fact, almost any episode involving Ben's love life in Omniverse is probably some of the worst shit I've ever seen in this franchise. Don't think about it, 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 don't think about it! In fact, The Most Dangerous Game Show, the final example of this, is probably my least favorite episode in all of Omniverse. Catfight is one of those episodes you could classify as just simple, funny, and silly. If you're not a fan of the more comedic-centered episodes of Omniverse, I don't really think Catfight is for you, but I still get a lot of enjoyment out of it. I like the idea of Ben's love interest, if you want to call him that, basically fighting over him because of his alien forms. My only issue is that Nancy Chan hypnotizing Raph took a little too much screen time. I don't really find the Raph being a kitty cat jokes that funny, honestly, so it didn't really land for me too much, but everything else about the episode I did enjoy. I know that Nancy Chan gets a lot of hate, but I like her as a villain. She's just a silly little villain, and she's cute. Nothing wrong with her, honestly. Honestly, I can't hate an episode too much that has Tay as the focus. She's a fun villain. I love her. She's great. And also, while she doesn't really do much this episode, it was nice to see Rayon in an episode, Rook's love interest. I think one thing that makes this episode better than the other harem episodes is the fact that this one doesn't really focus on that aspect as much as the others. It's not so much about Ben having a love interest, but more so Ben not wanting to deal with any of this bullshit. I also just love this transformation sequence for Blitzwolfer. This little moment is the best thing that Blitzwolfer ever does across the entire series. I wish I was kidding. While this episode is far from the best Omniverse has to offer, of course, I do think it's harmless and just a lot of fun. And that about does it for the episodes I wanted to defend, or in a more accurate description, episodes I just happen to like that don't tend to get talked about a lot or are actually hated. Did I give you guys a new perspective on these episodes, or do you still happen to dislike them, or did you like them also beforehand? Let me know if there's any episodes that you thought were overhated or underappreciated. As I mentioned before, this is episode 0 of a super secret project I've been alluding to, which I am going to announce very soon. I hope you guys look forward to that, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. Thank you as always, and happy night hunting.